Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. Happy Hump Day. It is Wednesday, midway through the week. It is April 24th, 2024. What is that? 04-24-24. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but it seemed as I said it like it might be worth pointing out anyway. Better than 420. We don't do any of that funny 420 business on the Andrew Lawton Show, although my inability to say funny 420 business may lead you to suspect otherwise. But nevertheless, we had a bit of a special delivery to the studio a few moments ago. I won't lift the whole box because I will embarrass myself. But it was a box full of these bad boys that just showed up. This is my new, well, you're getting the reflection of the light there. There we go. This is my new book, forthcoming biography. Well, is it still forthcoming if I'm holding it in my hands? I don't know. For the rest of you, it's forthcoming. The release date is May 28th. And it is called Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life. It is a full-length biography. You don't need to put the cover up when I'm holding it, Sean. That was just until we had this thing, although that actually looks like a nicer image. But there you go. It's Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life. A lot of fun, actually. And people, when I wrote my book about the Freedom Convoy, complained that there weren't pictures in it. So on this one, we have a photo. I shouldn't show you the photos because I can't give it away, but I'll show you one photo. This is on the inside cover. We got some old Poilievre family photos there that are in the mix. So this is a book that I was really excited to write, and I hope you are excited to read if you're interested in it and have tolerated this never-ending promo of it. I was very excited to get those a few moments ago. You can pre-order it for yourself at Amazon, at Indigo, or through the publisher, which is Sutherland House, and they're at sutherlandhousebooks.com. But nevertheless, I'm sure there will be more about that as the release date nears. I wanted to, first and foremost, talk about... Actually, Pierre Poilievre factors into this story a little bit, because you may recall not that long ago, Pierre Poilievre launched an ad campaign in which he uttered the phrase that I don't think most Canadians really disagreed with, that Canada is broken. And you see this on the micro level when you have Canadians who at the time were unable to get passports because the passport offices were in such disarray. And then you also had the idea that we also see increasingly an economy that is pricing out young people from the housing market, where people are not able to get jobs. You have everyone relying on the gig economy, and so on and so forth. And Pierre Poilievre made the comment that I think in large ways explains why he has become such a popular vehicle in polling numbers, which is that people are not satisfied with the status quo. Justin Trudeau is the status quo. Pierre Poilievre is the change candidate right now. And Justin Trudeau got so indignant about this. You may recall this speech that he gave at the Liberal Party convention just a couple of months after Pierre Poilievre was named Conservative Leader.
Mr. Poilievre might choose to undermine our democracy by amplifying conspiracy theories. He might decide to run away from journalists when they ask him tough questions. That's how he brands himself. That's his choice. But when he says that Canada is broken, that's where we draw the line. This is Canada. And in Canada, better is always possible, but I don't accept Canadians and politicians that talk down our country. Let me be very clear. Let me be very clear for the record. Canada is not broken.
Very offended at the assertion that anyone could say Canada is broken. Yeah, we can always do better, but the country is not broken. The country is not broken. Canada's working. Everything's hunky-dory. We've been doing a fantastic job at it. Well, don't I listen to, because I do this stuff so you don't have to, a 30-minute podcast interview that Justin Trudeau did this week with Vox in the U.S. And obviously it was a fairly left-leaning interviewer, someone who was born in Canada, but now lives in the United States. And most of the questions to Justin Trudeau were basically like that old Simpsons question that Lisa asked Mr. Burns, which was, your campaign has all of the momentum of a runaway freight train. Why are you so popular? So there wasn't really anything challenging, but you still get some revealing insights from Justin Trudeau's answers. And in particular, I enjoyed him talking about the trials of being a young Canadian. This is in audio form only, but take a listen.
People are facing an anxiety that the economy doesn't work for them anymore, that the principles that held true for us Xers, for boomers, of getting a good job, being able to save up for while you rent, to buy a house eventually, and then you get a mortgage and you build things forward like that, that just doesn't work anymore, that the deck is stacked against young people in a way that is different from previous generations. Sure. And that's a problem because it leads to a sense of uncertainty about the future and a sense of, okay, the institutions and society and government can't actually help. And that sort of feeds into populism. The challenge that we have is, okay, what are the biggest challenges out there? In Canada, housing. People can't imagine working as a nurse or a carpenter or an electrician or a police officer and living in the city that they serve. Well, that's something that we should be able to fix, and we're working on fixing that. We need to make sure things like people who are paying $2,000 a month on rent, besides someone else who's paying $2,000 a month for a mortgage, well, that rent should be counted towards their credit score so they can eventually get a mortgage. That's something that nobody thought of before because rent was never such a huge part of people's expenditures. Making that change gives people hope, again, that you can see a better future in which you're going to be able to succeed.
So, on one hand, he's saying that in his old speech that, oh, it's terribly offensive. You can't look down on Canadians by saying Canada's broken. And now in this interview, he's literally saying that the economy doesn't work for young Canadians, that institutions aren't serving them, that the deck is stacked against them, and that things aren't working for them. Now, I am no linguist, but I would say that things are not working and things are broken are pretty semantically similar. I don't think you can be all offended and high and mighty and get on your, tall, high hybrid horse because, well, the horse has been phased out with the carbon tax. You can't get on your high horse and be so offended and mortified that someone says Canada is broken while turning around and saying, well, you know what, things aren't broken. So for starters, there is some brazen hypocrisy here that Justin Trudeau is exhibiting when he makes, on one hand, the comment that the brokenness of Canada is non-existent, and on the other hand, concedes that. And then there's the other side of this, which is how on earth he can convincingly say that he has the answers when he has been the guy on whose watch things have gotten exactly where they have gotten for the last 8 years, pushing 10 by the time the next election is likely to roll around. So all of a sudden, Justin Trudeau, just as we heard from his government on immigration, they've just been this hapless bystander while everything in Canada has happened. And it doesn't matter that it's been on their watch. It's somehow not their fault. It's Stephen Harper's fault. In this Vox interview that he did, which I won't share the whole half hour of with you, he was asked about populism. And, Pierre Poilievre is the angry, meanie populist, and Justin Trudeau, he's the guy with all the answers. But what's fascinating here is that Trudeau has said, oh, well, it's global, and none of this stuff is just in Canada. This is happening everywhere. So he is basically trying to make it out to be that anything bad in the country is not his fault. Anything good was his doing. And we're all supposed to just not see the glaring inconsistencies in that. So you've either been the most inept, incompetent prime minister, or you have been just an incredibly malicious force and malignant force in Canada. Those are the two options. None of this, oh, well, it's a global trend and we've just been, his defense is basically that we've done nothing and we couldn't stop it, but trust us because we're going to stop it moving forward. That has been Justin Trudeau's line on this. Now, that interview he did with Vox, I don't know how many votes it's going to get him in Canada, but it's part of a new fandangled strategy the Liberals are rolling out, which I saw in a Toronto Star piece written by Susan Delacourt. Now, Susan Delacourt is an absolutely lovely woman. She's always been very good to me and has never been as rude rude as many of the others in legacy media towards independent media, but she's also not a particularly critical voice when it comes to Justin Trudeau, and that's perhaps why she has a home in the Toronto Star there. But she says, you're about to hear, this is the headline, you're about to hear Justin Trudeau on a lot more popular podcasts. Here's what's behind it. And this is apparently part of a strategy where Justin Trudeau thinks that people need to hear more from him. So all of these terrible Liberal polling numbers that put, him, the desirability of him as Canada's prime minister at like 18% among Canadians who have been surveyed, all of that is just because they haven't heard enough from him. No. Over the last 8 years, Canada and Canadians have not heard enough from Justin Trudeau. And if only they knew the guy more, if only they heard from him more, then they would be more inclined to support the Liberals. Maybe they're just not that into you, Prime Minister. Maybe Canadians know full well who you are and what you're about, and they know full well that you're the guy who's been at the helm for the last 8 years. And that is precisely why they are turning at you and turning on you and your government in such a dramatic way. Now, I talked a bit, this was going back like 24 days ago now, when this big giant carbon tax protest started up. And again, for a lot of people, it was just a protest on April 1st against the carbon tax. For some people, specifically in Alberta and also in Atlantic Canada, as I just learned, the carbon tax protest has continued. People have continued to protest the carbon tax. They've continued to log their discontent about what's been happening in this world with the Spike the Hike campaign from Pierre Poilievre, the tax campaign, and all of that. But what's been interesting here is that Pierre Poilievre was doing a little swing through Atlantic Canada. I don't know what day it was exactly. It was probably on the weekend, but I'm not sure. And he decided to stop. He saw some of these carbon tax protesters near the New Brunswick-Nova Scotia border. He decided to pull over and have a little chat with them. Now, what was interesting about this little chat is that they were, of course, filming and streaming, as you do when you get a heavyweight VIP that drops by your protest site. I was going to share some of the clips, but the volume is really, really low, so it would have been difficult. But you can hear him say at one point that everything that Justin Trudeau says is BS. At another point, you can see him walking by their F Trudeau flag, which they have on the back of one of their trucks. And then he tours this little camper trailer type thing that they have set up. And one of the things on that, like if you really, really zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, on that trailer, there's what's called the Diagolon flag. And I thought I could have gone through the rest of my life without ever having to mention Diagolon, but here we are. It was a group that, like Marco Mendicino, basically held up as being some, terror group when the Emergencies Act was coming in. It started off as this weird internet subculture meme and joke and has since ballooned into a larger community. I don't believe Diagolon is an organized group in any meaningful way. I also will fully say that many of the people associated with Diagolon, including its founder, Jeremy McKenzie, have said some absolutely vile things. These are the folks who were sitting around on a webcast joking about Anna Poilievre, Pierre Poilievre's wife, being raped. So I've got no time for them, but I also would fairly confidently say that there are probably some people out there that just thought it was a funny joke and aren't part of any of that. But nevertheless, there was a Diagolon flag on the side of this camper, and then the media lost their minds on this. And it set up Justin Trudeau to smack down Pierre Poilievre's comments about him as a peddler of BS at a press conference this morning.
Hi, Michelle Song with CBC News. Your opponent was photographed posing with anti-carbon tax protesters flying F Trudeau flags. In the video, Pierre Poilievre is heard saying that you are a liar and everything you say is, quote, bullshit. Can we get your response, please?
Every politician has to make choices about what kind of leader they want to be. Are they a kind of leader that is going to exacerbate divisions, fears, and polarization in our country, make personal attacks, and welcome the support of conspiracy theorists and extremists? Because that's exactly what Pierre Poilievre continues to do, not just when you see him engaging with members of Diagolon, but also when he refuses to condemn and reject the endorsement of Alex Jones.
Alex Jones is a proven liar and conspiracy theorist who has to pay hundreds of millions of dollars because he lied about the Sandy Hook killing that killed 20 little kids. This is the kind of man who's saying Pierre Poilievre has the right ideas to bring the country towards the right, towards conspiracy theories, towards extremism, towards polarization, towards the kind of lies that Alex Jones is peddling still. So the fact that Pierre Poilievre hasn't stood up to condemn that endorsement, the fact that he continues to encourage the kind of divisive approaches to Canada that I don't think Canadians want to see, really shows that he will do anything to win, anything to torque up negativity and fear. And it only emphasizes that he has nothing to say to actually solve the problems that he's busy amplifying.
It's a bit of a good omen. Well, not good omen, but it's a bit of an illustrative omen about what the next federal election is going to look like. The Liberals are trailing in the polls. Canadians have grown increasingly frustrated with the carbon tax, so much so that they've been protesting for literally 24 days straight, more than 3 weeks, longer than the Freedom Convoy, protesting the carbon tax and the subsequent increases to the carbon tax. The leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition is driving through town, decides to pull over and say hello, and Justin Trudeau focuses on this tiny little itsy bitsy flag on a trailer and then pivots to Alex Jones and the far right. This was a tweet from the Liberals a couple of days ago. They've been doing this like every other day. Friendly reminder that Pierre Poilievre still has not denounced his endorsement from far-right American conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. So in the election, when the Conservative candidates are going to people's doors and saying, well, you know, we're going to axe the tax and get rid of Justin Trudeau, and the Liberals are going to be going to the door saying, yeah, I know everything's gotten worse for you in the last 8 years, but did you see that Alex Jones tweet? And that's going to be the election. So it's funny that Justin Trudeau likes to go on American podcasts and rail against the angry, solution-free populism that he puts at Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre's feet, while he's the one that is blathering on about Alex Jones when his opponent dares to meet with a couple of people that are fed up with the federal carbon tax. Quite revealing, you might say. Well, let's pivot to this. I mentioned the Freedom Convoy. This is a relic in some ways of an era that many people would rather move on from, an era in which Canadians were segregated along the lines of their vaccine status. And we saw people that were forced out of jobs they had had for years, careers they had for years, and people who bravely put on a uniform for this country that were told they were no longer fit to serve Canada in the Canadian Armed Forces because they would not get vaccinated against COVID-19. Well, a story from the Epoch Times this week says that at least some Canadian Armed Forces members have been given waivers that allow them to serve once again if they were previously sanctioned for not getting the COVID vaccine. I wanted to talk about this with Catherine Christensen, a lawyer with Valour Law. Good to talk to you again, Catherine. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Good afternoon, Andrew. It's good to be back.
So let's first off start with what's actually changed here. What has the Canadian Armed Forces done?
Well, first of all, the mandate still exists for Canadian Armed Forces members. Certainly, anyone who isn't vaccinated, isn't getting deployed, isn't eligible for promotion. Although I can tell you that some of the people who stood up and managed to stay serving have been promoted, have been on deployments without vaccination. So there's some confusion there. But apparently last fall, they quietly brought in a policy that anyone who would receive a 5F, which is unfit for service release category, strictly because of the COVID mandate, would be allowed to re-enroll and that their applications were welcome. And with the caveat that all 5F reapplications have to be approved by the Chief of Defence Staff. So if you get past the recruiting application piece, the Chief of Defence Staff has final say. Now, I have had clients of mine who were 5F'd approach recruiting centres, certainly since last fall, even as early as last month here in March, and the recruiting centres won't even take their application. But then I got news that directly from a recruiting source that indeed this policy is now back, that they are allowed to apply. Now, in Noah's Chartier's article, he points out that they say they've only had one person apply under this relaxed policy. I'm going to question that, because I know that for sure that there has been a lot more than one person try to apply and been turned down at the recruiting centers.
Well, and I would also point out here, I mean, while this might be on the surface something that looks quite positive, it doesn't really get to the crux of the issue here, which is that they still have, as you note, the mandate. They've never really apologized for it. They've never done anything to say, hey, we want you back. It seems like they're just dealing with the fact that very few people are wanting to go into the Canadian Armed Forces right now. They've got a recruitment crisis, and I think they're trying to really dance around the real root of the issue here.
Yeah, well, the real root of the issue is 2 years ago, these same people were told they were unfit for service, that they were not any type of person that the Canadian Armed Forces wanted. And now all of a sudden they're quietly saying, oh no, come back. But come back without necessarily return to your same trade. What about compensation for the time you were off, if you were that qualified, that they want you back? I'm thinking that there's a bit of a conundrum they've got, because if they allow them back, they're defeating their own defense, because we've got lawsuits against them in the courts right now. I'm being able to stand up and say to the court, well, these people were supposedly unfit for service and needed to be permanently released, but now they're okay to come back. It's a bit of a dilemma.
Yeah, and the mandate itself is particularly absurd now, because if you had 2 doses of the COVID vaccine in 2021, your protection is 0 at this point. You have no benefit over someone who did not get vaccinated at this point. I mean, let's even assume there was a benefit in 2021. There isn't now. So the idea of clinging to this mandate just defies any sense of science. And really, I had spoken to one veteran about this a couple of years ago, and he had said that basically it was a compliance issue more than it was a medicine issue. They wanted to weed out the type of person that didn't want it more than there was any, strategic or operational reason that it needed to be there.
Exactly. Because let's face it, going into this mandate of General Ayres, they'd already gone through working in the nursing homes. So ground zero, where a lot of the deaths took place, we had armed forces members there, and not one of them died of COVID from that exposure. So that's pre-vaccine. So then they bring in this vaccination and decimated the Canadian Armed Forces because they lost so many people over it, as well as the woke agenda is also to blame. But they lost a lot of very capable people with exemplary military records just because of the people standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to take it, whether it's against my religion, whether I don't have informed consent, or I want my bodily autonomy, or I have medical reasons that I can't take it. And now that they're desperate, they seem to want them back.
We had you on the show back in June when you had launched, I think it was like a $500 million lawsuit representing hundreds of soldiers at the time about this. And I just wanted to ask, I know these things can take years, but what's the status on that one now?
Well, it's been interesting because we ended up launching a second mass tort after the first one came out and people approached our office. So we're up to about 458. And the 2 lawsuits, they were only a few months apart from filing, but they've caught up to each other because it's the same Crown lawyer. And they've been playing some games. We sent them our affidavit of documents, which is basically a list of our evidence. And they didn't reply back. And then, so I went into the court to force them to give me a list of their evidence. We've now ended up in case management, and we are before the case management justice next week. And I'm looking forward to hearing the Crown lawyer defend why he can't give me a list of his evidence to defend. Because at this point, they've got no evidence. And the longer they delay, the better it is for me, because now we're well over 300,000 pages of evidence of wrongdoing in the Canadian Armed Forces. So they keep delaying, it's just going to get worse.
I seem to recall, and I might be mixing up the case, but when there was the lawsuit against the federal air travel vaccine mandate, I think the applicants had a similar issue, in that it was like pulling teeth to get the government to provide the evidentiary base it had for this policy, which, I mean, maybe in politics you can get away with fudging on the evidence, but in a court there is still a process, and if you don't provide evidence for your side of it, you don't actually have a case, do you?
Right. Yeah. So this is exactly what my motion in January, when I filed it, was saying, well, if they don't want to provide me with any evidence to defend, then I want leave of the court to bring a summary judgment. Give us what we asked for, because you can't defend against what we've claimed. They're in a bit of a situation here because CAF is well known for blocking any access to information requests. But we spent 2 years very quietly asking for information through access to information requests. And we collected hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence before they even knew we were bringing a lawsuit, because not one of those requests came out of my office. They were all done by private individuals. So we've kind of gone around, done an end run around them, and we have a lot more evidence, I think, than they realized that we would have going into the lawsuit. So I also...
sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think they're also trying to delay moving into depositions, where I'm going to be calling General Eyre, General Cadieux, General Fortin, Admiral MacDonald. All of those are going to be called to testify under oath. And when General Whalen's court-martial was coming along, the day before they wanted to have Eyre testify at that, they dropped the charges to keep him from having to testify under oath. So
interesting.
Well,
no, they're terrible. They're terrible with access to information requests. I filed one in January about tampons in washrooms on army bases, because they were all getting removed by soldiers that thought it was nonsense when there's a tampon dispenser in the men's washroom, and that's still taken over 3 months, and I don't have the records yet. So I feel I have to buckle in for a long wait. I'm amazed you got all you did in 2 years, given how DND has been on these requests in the past.
Well, the Information Commissioner has actually been very helpful. She has actually brought lawsuits against the CAF to get documents that we have asked for. The longest access to information request, I thought it was a long time, but there's some that have been years and years and years, and they still don't have that information, even though they're entitled to it. So we did it. We kind of outmaneuvered the system. Which is what my clients hired me to do, because after we tried the injunction, I said, okay, we're going to go deep, we're going to go dark, and I've got all military people who are really good at keeping secrets if they have to, and very smart and very motivated, and they did fantastic work for me.
Yeah, it shows what happens when you alienate a very skilled, dedicated group of people, and they have an axe to grind, time on their hands, and those skills that were previously being deployed for the country and now are being deployed against the bureaucrats in the department.
And keep in mind that these are people who know that the documents exist because they wrote the documents.
So they know what to ask for, which is so key. It's not just a fishing expedition, right?
Yeah. They're like, well, here's my chain of command, and I know I had emails with all of these people, and in some cases they still had the email. They brought it with them, so we knew to send in the information request to get it legitimately through the process, and then they'd say, "Well, no, that doesn't exist," and we go, "Yes, it does."
Well, good stuff. Well, wish you well on this, Catherine. Please do keep us posted as you work your way through the system here.
I sure will. And we're also bringing a vaccine injury one. We've got lots of members of the Canadian Armed Forces who were injured from the Moderna vaccine. So that's coming up too.
All right. Well, appreciate that very much. Catherine Christensen from Valour Law out in Alberta. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Take care, Andrew.
All right. Well, one issue that we have been covering all week has been the United Nations' ongoing efforts to push a plastics treaty. We have the big confab in Ottawa this week, thousands of delegates from around the world. We had the federal government on Monday announce the formation of a plastics registry, which will be coming around 2025, I believe. And we've talked about some of the details on that. But I think at its core, we have to really go back to first principles here, because what the federal government has done is really designated plastic as a toxin. And once you've done that, once you say plastic is toxic, you're actually able to justify a lot, which was why the federal government was slapped down in the way that it was when it had that single-use plastics ban. The Conservative Party of Canada now has decided to launch a campaign to bring back the plastic straws, which isn't. We don't have the photo handy, but that's an issue near and dear to my heart, the plastic straw crusade by the government. But let's actually talk about the science here. We have always been told we have to follow the science. What does the science say on plastics? I wanted to bring into the show Dr. Chris DeArmitt. He's the president of Phantom Plastics. Now, he actually is an expert on this. He's not just a guy who is in the industry and represents a commercial interest. He actually knows the science in and out on this and has spoken about it around the world. Chris, it's good to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
So let's talk first and foremost about that idea of plastic being a toxin. What's the argument that they advance to justify this? And why would you say they're getting it wrong, or what are they missing?
Yeah, that's a great point. So you can't just make up things and say this is that or that's the other. I mean, there are scientific ways of telling what's toxic and what isn't toxic. So when that accusation was made, I went and looked up the science. And that's the problem in general. People say, this person's for plastic, against plastic. We shouldn't be for or against anything. We should be for finding what's true, right? And then once we found the evidence, once we found what's true, then we move on from there and make sensible choices. And people have forgotten that. They're so busy taking sides, no one's checking the facts. So I'm looking at a table right here, which I've posted online, which is, the EPA's definition of what's toxic and what's less toxic. And if we look at plastics, we like polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, and so forth, we find that they're the safest things. So there are 4 categories of toxicity. They're in the safest category that there is. So they're as safe as things we have on our table. They're safer than table salt, for example. And I'm looking at a list of, they're as safe as alcohol, which we drink every day. That's the category that these plastics are in. They're literally so safe you could eat them every day and nothing would happen to you. So it's, whereas if you look at things like copper metal, which drinking water pipes are made of, they're in the most toxic category. So there are ways of telling what's toxic, what isn't toxic. There are literally numbers that define how much of this you can ingest and have a problem or not have a problem. And plastics are simply non-toxic. So for somebody to just make up in his bathtub one day, this is toxic and I decree it so. He's not Julius Caesar, right? I mean, there are actual ways, and scientists have been studying this for 50 years, right? It's all documented and available to the public. So it's beyond absurd that somebody should make such a proclamation.
Well, and I find that in this argument, and certainly when you look at the policy response to it, they conflate 2 issues, because you could say plastic is non-toxic, but there is a pollution issue. And you could say we don't like plastic that's being dumped in the oceans in parts of the world. But you're right that when they use the toxic label to justify policy, which is what the federal government in Canada did, it just doesn't have a basis at all. So how do they argue that it is when the evidence is so clear on this that it isn't?
That's strange. I haven't looked into their argument, actually. I haven't. So I'm a scientist. I
don't think there's much there.
They just made it up. I do know that I looked at the same guy, and it's so funny that they call him Right Honourable, because it appears to be anything but honourable as far as I can tell, because whenever I compare what he says to what science says, they're the exact opposite. He tried to ban a flame retardant called DBDPE, and I wrote a report. I was so outraged that I wrote a report and read all the science on that. He proposed banning one of the safest flame retardants that prevents Canadians from dying in their bed in flames, based on 0 evidence. He had not one piece of experimental evidence upon which to declare this stuff is dangerous. And there is science on that substance. It's been thoroughly tested for years and years and years and found to be completely safe. It's so safe that if you eat it, like not a molecule of it dissolves because it's completely insoluble. So they say that they're banning this flame retardant on the precautionary principle, which means better safe than sorry. Whereas what they're actually doing is the opposite. It's better sorry than safe. You're saying, okay, I'd rather that hundreds of Canadians potentially die in flames on the one hand versus 0 evidence of toxicity on the other. And that's what happens when you let ideology get it out of control and forget to check the data.
Just as a complete non-scientist here, I'll ask you, are all plastics, when it comes to the toxicity question, are all plastics created equally? Or is there a distinction between, the plastic that's in a plastic straw and the plastic that's in an industrial PVC pipe?
Yeah, well, in general, plastics are made of really big molecules. And so the FDA has declared them basically safe. So plastics are assumed to be safe because they don't migrate around. The molecules can't move. They can't go through your skin, for example. The molecules can't go through your skin. They're so large. So they're considered due to their very nature, safer than almost all chemicals. Is there a plastic that's toxic? I don't know of one. I've looked at all the major thermoplastics, and I don't think I can think of a plastic right now that's toxic. And if another question that people ask is, okay, well, maybe the plastic's not toxic, but what about the additives in them? And that table I just mentioned, I looked up the toxicity of the standard additives in these plastics like polyethylene, polypropylene. And don't forget, these are things FDA approved that you can put them in your mouth and store food in them. So they've already been tested and found to be safe. We know what migrates out of them, the additives, if they come out and how much. But even the additives themselves, when you check their toxicity, they're the same as plastics. They're so safe you can eat teaspoons of them and nothing happens to you.
Might not be delicious though. But flavor is not the metric here. So let's take a look at what's happening in Ottawa this week. We have the world leaders on this trying to convene to create a plastic treaty. And you have the federal government in Canada saying we need a plastic registry. Companies need to account for all that they're doing and creating. I know you've actually consulted with a lot of these companies in the past. And as I've understood it, a lot of them are well aware of what they're producing and where it's going. I mean, this is just a basic part of what they're doing from an industrial perspective. And I don't see why the hand of government is what's needed here.
Yeah. So let me give some perspective on that. My job is to be a plastic scientist, and I've done it for decades, right? The thing that I'm discussing with you today is not what I get paid to do. I'm not paid to be a plastic environmentalist. The reason I got into this is that my own daughters were taught lies at school, and that made me angry. So as a hobby, I read 4,000 scientific studies, and I found that nobody's checking the facts. The media aren't checking the facts, apart from people like you who crusade for truth like I do. And the green groups are making hundreds of millions of dollars from telling lies, because every time you compare what they say to the facts, you find that they're the exact opposite, as I mentioned. So have you ever heard that we eat a credit card of plastics a week, for example? The latest scientific peer-reviewed study said it would take 20,000 years to eat a credit card of plastic. But guess what? These green groups have got that up on their websites right next to a big, juicy donate now button, right? And if you want to understand something, follow the money. So I'm not here to defend plastics. I'm not here to do anything other than take the evidence, which was really tedious. I didn't have these reading glasses before I started reading these thousands of studies. So I take the evidence and present it fairly. So if you look on my website or in my free book, you'll see that everything that I quote is cited verbatim, where I literally copy and paste from the study with zero spin and cite the study so you can click a link and go and check it yourself. And that's where we should start. Let's not start with pro-plastic or against plastic. Let's start with what's true and what isn't true. And to your point, probably the single most disappointing thing for me is that this thing with plastics is a big distraction. If you look at what's actually harming the environment, plastic is 0.5% of the materials we use. So in our obsession to talk about plastic all day and all night, which is 0.5% of the materials we use, it's the greenest option in 90% of cases, according to life cycle studies. So we're obsessing over 0.5% of all of our materials. That's almost always the least harmful option, and completely ignoring the 99% of material, which is almost always the most harmful option. So the issue isn't that plastics have an impact. They certainly do. And there is litter, but it's not just plastic that's litter, and litter isn't caused by materials either. It's caused by people. So pretty much everything is off track here. We're not making any impact, and we're in fact doomed to failure if we keep obsessing over plastic and not talking about the 99% of problematic materials.
Well, and also a lot of these objectives from the green industry tend to butt up against each other. I was skimming through your book, The Plastics Paradox, and one of the headlines you cite is about Coca-Cola, in that Coca-Cola was so committed to reducing its carbon footprint, they got rid of aluminum and switched to plastic bottle collection. So here you have, again, a company saying, oh, wow, we have to do the right thing for the environment. Plastic is the environmentally superior alternative.
Yes, the only way to know what's more harmful and less harmful is something called a life cycle analysis. And that's accepted by governments and NGOs and companies all around the world. And it's scientifically proven for 50 years and honed to become better and better. And it's peer reviewed, so it's hard to cheat, right? And there are 5 such studies on drink containers that you just mentioned. And they all say that the plastic bottle causes least harm. So why would you ever go to metal or glass, which is scientifically proven to cause vastly more harm? And I'm not just talking about CO2, vastly more fossil fuel burned, because you need a lot of energy to make to melt glass and metal, and more of the other things as well, like eutrophication and acid rain and so forth. It's when you switch to an alternative, you end up with more waste, more harm in almost every parameter you can measure.
Yeah, and the thing is that we have to look at what we are creating plastic to replace and what those alternatives are. I mean, people would love to say, all right, let's take the plastic bottle away. And sure, maybe we could all use a reusable water bottle that somehow is better than a plastic water bottle. But for the most part, I don't think it works out. And anyone who's ever had reusable grocery bags knows you basically buy as many of them as you would use plastic bags because you forget them at home. And I feel that it's more intensive here. But plastic is replacing something. And, I'll read the list that you have here: paper, cotton, glass, and metal. You have to pick one material of those, and plastic is generally the best of them.
If you look at 100 life cycle studies, plastic beats those materials in every study I've seen. The only things that are consistently greener than plastic are wood and wool. And unfortunately, we can't run the internet based on a knitted computer and a wooden wires coming to our house.
And
right?
my wool straw hasn't taken off yet. I need to go back and rework the prototype.
So yeah, there are things that are greener than plastic in certain applications. And I say that in my book because I am genuinely just trying to be honest here and show people the facts so they can make smart choices. So what we have is a bunch of green groups who, as Dr. Patrick Moore said, and I have his book in front of me, here's 2 of his books. This is a guy who was the president of Greenpeace, and he left in disgust and said they just make up lies for donations. They abandoned the environment decades ago, according to him. And the other big green groups did the same thing. They're making hundreds of millions from just saying things that aren't true when you check the science. And that's the problem, because government's listening to these people. I was just in Ottawa with a bunch of these people all around telling whoppers all day long. Whereas the plastics people are in there spending hundreds of millions of their own money, losing money sometimes, doing things which are the right thing to do, even though they might not be profitable. And it's exactly the wrong way around. When we're kids, we're taught that it's the big bad industry, and then there are these crusaders for truth. But this has been distorted and turned the other way around, where the people that we think crusade for truth are just telling us lies all the time.
So let me ask you, and I fear I know the answer to this, but perhaps you can set me at ease. Do governments call you up? Do politicians call you up when they're putting these policies in place? Or is it done completely in the absence of all this evidence you've collected over the years?
Yeah, so as I said, this is a hobby. And for the first 3 years, so I've done it all unpaid, not a single penny, right? And in the beginning, people were really shocked at the message because they'd never seen the truth before. So they were rightfully amazed. And I said, well, please look, because there are 2 sides and one side has the evidence on it. So now we're a few years later and I'm being asked to give speeches, and governments are asking me. So the Canadian shadow government has asked me to testify and show the facts. And the United Arab Emirates said, hey, we don't want to make the same mistakes that they made in Europe and in America and Canada. We want to start afresh, look at the evidence, and then make policies. Because you mentioned bags a second ago. There was a bag ban in New Jersey, and they looked afterwards to see what happened. And what happened after the ban was just what you said would happen. They had vastly higher sales of plastic because these very thin plastic bags had to be replaced with much thicker bags. So you go and buy an actual garbage can liner, which is 5 times thicker than a transparent polyethylene grocery bag. And they had what they said was exponentially more greenhouse gas. And that's exactly what we would have predicted by the 30 studies which are published that said that would happen. And instead, they just implement these policies. And it literally takes you 10 seconds to do a Google search. You can go into Google now and type in LCA BAG, and you will find peer-reviewed life cycle studies. Why has no politician ever done that? Why hasn't Greenpeace or the World Wildlife Fund or Ellen MacArthur Foundation in the last years and years and years ever occurred to them to do a Google search on the very topic that they claim to care about? That is shocking, and that really shows what their true motives are.
Well, I'm glad you've made your book available for free. They have no excuse to not read it. The Plastics Paradox. I dug into it this week, and I hope to finish it on the weekend. But Dr. Chris DeArmitt, thank you so much, sir. Really great to talk to you.
Thanks for caring about evidence. I really respect that. Cheers. Thanks.
All right. I appreciate your appreciation of it. Thank you, Chris. Well, since we're plugging books here, let me do this one again. Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life, hot off the press. It's available for pre-order at Amazon, Indigo, and Sutherland House. That's it for me for today. We will be back tomorrow with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news. Trudeau.